Well, hello everybody. Good evening. Tonight's topic is one that seems to be of great interest to many people. Demons and other negative forces is the topic of tonight's class. And let's get right into it. If you have questions about these things, you can ask in the chat box as well. So, demons and negative forces, what's the reality of them? What are they all about? What's going on? There is, in fact, mentioned in already in biblical works, the concept of the Satan. Satan, or that's the Hebrew for it, Satan in English, is mentioned in the book of Joshua, for example, and various other places. Actually, in the Bible itself, we don't really get the we don't get that terminology used so much, but nevertheless, it is implicit, if not explicit. There's the angel of death, Malach HaMaves, and there is what is called the Yetzer Hara, which is usually translated as the inclination to evil, but better translated as, it's usually translated as the evil inclination, better translated as the inclination to evil, or even better, the inclination to self-destruction. So our sages tell us that these are all these three things are actually the same thing. The Satan, the Yetzer Hara, the evil impulse, or the impulse to self-destruction, again, which is called the Yetzer Hara, and the angel of death are all the same thing. Now, let's try and understand a little bit better what the idea is over here and what it's all about, and what the thinking is in biblical terms of why such a thing is actually necessary. So first of all, when it comes to the idea of Satan, when we talk about Satan, the terminology, actually, the origin of the word is really from a word in Hebrew, which means to swerve aside or to stray from the path, to stray. That's what the Satan is all about. It's all about the concept of straying. This demon sort of idea is all about the concept of straying from the path. But in a much more general sense, and I think this is the sense that we should all focus on, is the idea of the personalized Satan, rather than the sort of the generic brand. We all have our own designer brands of evil, right? That's demons, yeah, the demons that we all personally have. They're all part of the same thing. Demon, Satan, doesn't matter what you want to call it. They're all part of the same thing. The demons, Satan, the inclination to self-destruction, the angel of death, all of them are the same thing. They're just different aspects of it. Now, just to tell you a story to make things a little bit more, lighten things up a little bit so you shouldn't be so nervous. I see some people are writing messages and so on. Okay. There's a story which is, it's actually told it's an Iranian legend. It's a legend from Iran, from the wonderful country that's the main sponsor of terrorism in the world today, Iran. But there's a legend which is quite interesting, and it goes like this: that once a king, the king of Persia, Iran is Persia of old. So the king was taking a walk in his gardens, and he came across his minister, his chief vizier, or his chief minister, prime minister, I suppose you would call him, who was white and shaking. And he said to him, "My dear minister, like, what happened to you? What's going on?" So he said, I was threatened by the angel of death. He saw me and he threatened me. And I must get away from him. Could the king possibly help? The king said, "Of course, take my fastest horse and go wherever it is you want." "Where are you going to go?" So he said, I'm going to go to Tehran. It's a city far away from here. And perhaps the angel of death won't be able to find me there. And he borrowed the king's horse and off he galloped. As the king was walking further in the garden, so he saw the angel of death himself, and he said, "Why did you threaten my faithful servant, my prime minister?" So Satan said to him, the angel of death rather said to him, "I didn't threaten him, I just expressed surprise." "And what were you surprised about?" "Well, I was surprised that I saw him here in the palace when I have an appointment with him tonight in Tehran." So, folks, you're not going to get away from you're not going to get away from these things by running away from these things. You're going to get away from it by confronting the idea and learning how to act in ways that prevent the angel of death from threatening us, so to speak. And basically, the idea is as follows. All of us are created with a soul and a body, and the interface of the two is called really the animal soul, the animal soul. Now it's called an animal soul because it has habits like an animal. It's basically it's very it sticks in a very rigid pattern, just like an animal. Animals don't think about what's beyond them. They just think about their survival, and they think about where my next meal is coming from, and I think about being comfortable, basically. And that's the animal soul. The animal soul is the emotional qualities, the emotional reactions to events in the world are what are called in Hebrew the Yetzer Hara. That's the evil inclination, or as I much prefer to call it, the impulse to self-destruction. Now, why is that called the impulse to self-destruction? Because basically, indulging in the thinking and the emoting, if you can call it that, the emotional shenanigans of this force that's within us, by dint of the fact that we're human beings and we have an interface of soul and body. Because we have this, we are susceptible to influences which can lead us away from our proper focus, can lead us away from the proper focus. The proper focus is, of course, on the godliness within us, and essentially the beauty of the godliness within us, the godly soul, the divine soul, which we all possess in one level or another. Taking us away from that is what is called the evil inclination, the inclination to evil, to self-destruction. And the ultimate form of that is the angel of death. What happens is that our own inner demons, if you can call them that, although that may be perhaps a misnomer, when we call something a demon or the Satan or whatever, we tend to place the locus of it outside of ourselves. It's something that's happening to us, or rather than something that we're doing. And it's not quite correct. The origin of any forces outside of ourselves that may be forces of evil In other words, destructive and negative forces that may exist and do exist outside of ourselves, those have to be welcomed in, so to speak. And in fact, very often we don't only just let them in, we don't let these forces in, we actually put out the red carpet, and have a 15-piece band playing music, welcoming them, welcoming all these demons in. In other words, we sort of try to entertain them and give them a place, a place to call home, so to speak. Someone's asking the question here: is forbidden in the Zohar the name of Samael to be spoken out? Is it the same as the Satan, the evil inclination, the evil angel of death, a female equivalent? Yes to all of those questions. Yes, it's the same thing as the evil inclination, the same thing called Samael, etc., etc. And there is a female equivalent of it as well. There is a female aspect of it. But it all boils down to ourselves. It boils down to us. And ultimately, sometimes, right. I'm just replying to some comments over here. Yes, that is correct. It is sometimes, it takes upon different forms and different names and different, it kind of morphs. It's like one of these viruses that kind of morphs into all kinds of different things so you can never catch it. Very smart. It's a force against you, but it comes from within you. It comes from within you. Let me just tell you a story about a certain person. I might have told the story before, and I don't remember. I certainly have told it to other people before. I'm not sure about on this in this class, but there was a certain Hasidic Jew, in other words, a person who called himself a disciple, essentially, of the Baal Shem Tov. Although he lived several generations after the Baal Shem Tov, he lived in a generation ago. And he was sent to Siberia. He lived in Russia. He was sent to Siberia because of, basically, he was working against the Stalinist regime, which means quite simply that he would not accept communist ideology as anything great or anything to be proud of, and he worked against communist ideology because he felt it was wrong. And particularly he worked against it in the realm of education of little children, because the education of little children is where the communists actually excelled in driving the message home. They indoctrinated and brainwashed little kids who then grew up to be good little communists. And since he had opened a Jewish school where he would not teach the subjects, even though it was permissible theoretically to open a Jewish school, but because he would not teach communist ideals in that school and salute Stalin and so on in the school, so eventually he was sent off to Siberia. And he was there for a long period of time, like 18 years. In any event, when he came back, he said, when I was in Siberia, I learned one very, very important thing. I understood something that had been bothering me for many, many years. It says in I think it's in Mishlei, in Proverbs, that the Satan, the Satan, is a melech zokain uksil. He's an old and foolish king. He's called old. I'll respond to some of the questions in a minute. He's called old because he's there from the moment that we're born, right? The moment that we're born, he's there. He comes in before the good inclination, the inclination towards self-preservation, the inclination towards self-growth in a spiritual sense. So this force, this negative force, which we call Satan, This negative force is called old because he's there from the very beginning. And he's called a king. He said, that I understand, because he rules over us, right? He rules over us. It's called a king. That's clear, an old and foolish king. But why is he called foolish? He's smarter than I am. He's smarter than most people are. So why would we call him foolish? It doesn't make any sense to call him foolish. So he said, then I was sent to Siberia for 18 years. And I understood now why he's called foolish. Because he came with me. He could have been sitting at home in a nice warm bed and eating 3 meals a day and talking to his friends and having a good time. But the idiot decided to come with me to Siberia, you see. So that's why he's called stupid. Yeah, an old and foolish king. That's how I explain it. Now, he wasn't just making a joke. The truth is, he was being very serious, because wherever we go, we tend to carry this thing with us. The beginning of the destruction of the satanic forces against us, or the demons within us, if you want to call it that, is a realization that this force hangs around until we do something about it. Frank asks, is it really a person? No, it's not. It's a force. It's not necessarily the other side of free choice. It's not the other side of free choice, but we tend to make our choices based on the wrong principles, based on looking at the wrong things. What is it that we want from life, or rather, what is it that we're here for? Is something that we don't think about too often. What is it that I'm here for? What we think about is, what can I get out of the situation? What's good in it for me? And that, to a certain extent, is a Yetzer Hara type approach to things. In other words, an approach which has the tendency to lead us away from our mission in life, what it is that we're supposed to be doing, and gets stuck in the weeds with all kinds of forces. Now, let me just explain to you why I decided to talk about this tonight. I had a client this afternoon, client actually from a different country, from Germany, in fact, and this client was very concerned about forces that were going on in her life, which she felt were causing her to trip up and to do wrong things and to do harmful things and so on and so forth. There was a negative force that she felt all around her, and she felt like she really couldn't escape from this morass of negativity and negative forces that surrounded her. After a few questioned her a few times and so on and so forth, and try to find out what the origin of this was, because very often what happens is certain outside circumstances do create a negative atmosphere around us. In her particular case, there were two things going on, which created a very negative force in her life. One of the sources of the negative force was a person who lived in her home, or the home in which she lived, who was always extremely angry. Now, anger is a force that causes negativity to the extreme, and this anger was causing forces that would sort of, so to speak, sucking her into self-destructive thoughts, self-destructive thinking. There was another force as well from a neighbor, actually, that also seems to have been a major influence. Now, what does one do? What does a person do when confronted by these negative forces? What is it that we really have to do in order to confront and eventually rid ourselves of the negative forces? So there are generally 3 approaches. One approach is to take a stick and, so to speak, beat the living daylights out of it. In other words, to remonstrate with yourself and to accuse yourself of being a person who's no good and a foul person and a person who nobody would want to live with and nobody would want to befriend, and who is evil in every way and nasty and callous and coarse and unhappy and makes others unhappy and so on. In other words, beat yourself up, good and proper. Some people have that approach. It's a classic Hasidic principle that you cannot drive out darkness with a stick, right? Classic Hasidic aphorism: you cannot drive out the darkness with a stick. You cannot drive out the Yetzer Hara with a stick. A person is causing themselves more destruction by taking such an approach than by just sort of letting it alone and not getting involved. Why? Because the more you focus on the evil that's within you, the more you focus on it as an evil force, the more strength it gets, the more energy it gets. Just like, just like a hurricane, since it's been in the news so much recently, the more attention there is on this hurricane, the more it sort of gathers strength, at least in people's imagination. And even, I would say, in the imagination of the weather people, and for sure in the imagination of the press, who would like, as many hits as possible on their websites or as many newspapers sold. In other words, basically, we tend to overblow things. We give it more energy by focusing on it than if we would just leave it alone, part ways. There's a famous story about Lev Yitzchak Berditchev. Lev Yitzchak Berditchev was the third generation of great Hasidic leaders. He was a disciple of the Maggid Mezritch and a very, very extremely holy person, and also a great lover of other people, someone who would go out of his way to make other people feel good and feel comfortable and help them out and so on and so forth. Anyway, at this point in time, he was a newly married man, and he was at his father-in-law's synagogue. His father-in-law was the rabbi of the shul, the rabbi of the synagogue, and he went to visit the father-in-law, maybe for the holidays or something like that, whatever it was. Anyway, they said to him, go and in a synagogue, so there's a leader of the prayers, and everyone prays together, and then the leader of the prayers repeats the prayer out loud. Right? It's called the Shemona Esrei, usually the 18 benedictions prayer. Anyway, whatever, we don't have to get into all the details, but that's usually how it goes, as the leader of the morning prayers, the afternoon prayers, the evening prayers, and so on and so forth. There's a leader. It's called the Chazan. So he was asked, he had a good voice, he was asked to be the cantor, the Chazan, the person who was leading the prayers. So he put on the mantle, the shawl, the prayer shawl, the talus. He puts it over his head, and he goes to the Amud. He goes to the place where the leader of the prayers usually stands, and he's standing there, and he's like in this. You could see he's like having some kind of an argument, and people are very puzzled, like what's going on over here. They're trying to listen. Who's he talking to? Like what's going on? And then he puts the talus over his head, the prayer shawl over his head, and he goes to. And he stands at attention as if he's going to begin the prayers. And then again, he gets into an argument. He takes the thing off his head, and there's an argument backwards and forwards. Anyway, this happens 3 times. Until eventually he takes off the prayer shawl and he throws it over the back of a chair. And he says, well, if you're so holy, why don't you pray from the lectern? Why don't you pray from the Amud? Why don't you daven from the Amud? What was going on, basically, as he explained afterwards, was when he went up to pray for the community, so his Yetzer Hara, his self-destructive impulse, said to him, "You're going to pray for the whole community? Like, come on, you know, between you and me, you know that you're not really worthy of this. After all, you did such and such, and you did such and such and such, and so on and so forth, and you didn't do this, and you didn't do that, and you could have done this, and you could have done that, and you did this, and you did that, and the whole litany of things that are bad, and that are wrong, and that are destructive to others, and so on and so forth. So I said, okay, you're right. Maybe I won't. And then the Yetzer Hara came back to him. The evil impulse comes back to him and says to him, but wait a minute, you know what? Well, are you any worse off than anybody else? Are you better than anybody else? No, but you're not worse than you're not worse than anybody. Well, maybe you should do it. Maybe it's a matter of pride, and maybe you'll feel good about it, and you'll feel, of course, trying to lead him into praying for the wrong reasons. Anyway, they start this argument backwards and forwards, and so eventually he takes off the prayer shawl and he says, you know what? If you're so holy, why don't you pray from the lectern? Why don't you pray for the community? And he walked off. Well, it was a bit of an embarrassment to his father-in-law, but that was Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Bedichev. What I mean to say by this is, what the story tells us is that separate yourself from this impulse. It's something that's with you, but it's not you. It's something that can be changed. It's something that can be improved. It's something that can be rectified. It's not something innate that's there and it has to be there and it's always there and it always will be there. It doesn't have to be like that. Even the impulse to evil and to self-destruction, call it what you will, the Satan, the angel of death, whatever, has to acknowledge that you've done good things and that you will do good things. And the way to capture, so to speak, the way to capture and put it to death is not to be involved with it so much, but go to the opposite extreme. I'm not going to listen to you about things that I've done wrong. My focus is not going to be on the past, but my focus is going to be on the present and the future. In the present, I am trying to cleave to God, to be closer. I'm trying to get closer. And in the future, I'm going to do even more than that. I'm going to do much better. I'm going to get much closer. I'm going to do all of the things which will improve the relationship and bring me to a better place. The worst thing you can do is to try and argue with the negative impulse. Now, how does this show up? It shows up in psychology as well. I'm not talking about schizophrenics necessarily, but people who have various anxieties and things like this. To deal with anxiety as an anxiety and to try and identify and find out what the source is and find out what the cause is and find out when it happens and how it happens and this, you're just giving it more strength than it needs, right? More strength than you need to give it for sure. The way to deal with it is attrition. You starve it, right? Don't give it any attention, not any negative attention, not any positive attention. Just get out of here, leave me alone, I've got other things to do. In other words, the way to deal with it is, the way to deal with the darkness, as the Hasidim say, is to light a candle. You can't deal with it by trying to push out past activities, past actions. The only thing you can do is to light a candle, to increase goodness in the world, to increase kindness in the world, to increase positive thoughts, to increase your connection to God, to increase your connection to other human beings in a positive way. So Frank asks if that's when you focus on it, is that idolatry? I don't know if it's idolatry in and of itself, but it's certainly close to idol worship, right? You're giving it more strength than it deserves. As soon as you stop as soon as a person stops paying attention to the negative and rather focuses attention on the positive, the Yetzer Hara starts dying off. It doesn't have energy you're not giving it wants your attention. It's like a video game, wants your attention all the time, right? Wants your attention. But getting your attention is how it strengthens itself. So not that you shouldn't pay attention to it at all, but you should put your attention elsewhere, right? Put your attention on the positive and automatically the negative starts to atrophy. It starts to die off. It starts to starve. There's actually a story which is told it was a famous story of a Kabbalist whose name was Joseph de Lorena, who is buried up in Tzfas, in Safed, in an unmarked grave up in the Galilee in Israel, in the north. in an unmarked grave. I mean, there's now a small sort of headstone over there to mark the place, but it's basically an unmarked grave. It was unmarked for a very long time. Everyone knew where it was, but it was an unmarked grave for the following reason. So he decided he was going to capture, so to speak, he was going to use Kabbalistic means to capture the Satan, to capture him and to finally, once and for all, get rid of him. So without going, it's a long story, and you can look up the story of Yosef de Lorena. Very, very interesting story. D-E-L-A-R-E-I-N-A, or some spell it maybe R-A-I-N-A. Yosef de Lorena. You can look up the story in Kabbalah online and .org. They have the story there, as far as I remember. Yes, I'll share in a minute, Dennis. I will share an idea. So this Yosef de Lorena said he was going to, and he had all Kabbalistic means, and he was using holy names, and he had chains, so to speak, made of holy names that he would capture, and so on and so forth. And eventually he did. He was successful in capturing the Satan. He brought him back in captivity to the city of Tzfat, to Safed. And the Satan was dying. And he said to Yosef de Lorena, I'm going to be taken before the heavenly court to be judged, but I have to be there to be judged. I'm dying out. Can you just give me some sustenance? So he said, no, of course I can't give you sustenance. That would be completely opposite intention. Well, can you give me even sort of smelling salts or whatever? It was sort of incense to smell, something, smelling salts just to keep me alive just long enough to be judged by the Holy One, blessed be He. So Yosef de Lorena, without thinking, extended his hand and he gave him some incense to sniff, some whatever. And at that moment, the saint broke his chains. He broke his chains, and he said, "You just offered incense to idolatry. You offered incense to idolatry, and therefore you are damned." Basically, that's what happened. He was buried in an unmarked grave because he made a mistake. The same concept applies with us. Now, we're not out to capture, but we're out to do the opposite, to drive away. We're out to drive away. The first thing to do is don't pay it any attention. Don't make any deals, right? Don't make deals with the Yetzer Hara, with the angel of death, with the Satan. You know, I'll give you your due like 5 minutes a day or whatever it is, just after breakfast or whatever. No deals. There's no deal. I'm not making deals. I got other things to do, right? Focus on the positive. So, is there a good practice, Dennis asks, is there a good practice one can share for being present to the here and now, not fretting about the past and worrying about the future? Yes. That idea, don't fret about the past. What was. It's never going to be here again. The only way to rectify the past is what is called tshuva. Tshuva meaning returning. To return, to cling to, and to embrace godliness. So, one of the things that one has to do, there are several things that one can do. One of the things is to sit and to study godly matters. In other words, scripture or explanations of scripture and so on and so forth. In fact, the Talmud suggests that if you're being bothered by one of these demonic forces, the first possible thing to do is to go to the Beis HaMedrash, go to the study hall, and sit down and study, concentrate deeply. Of course, someone who's being very bothered by his own self-destructive forces perhaps won't be able to study that well. So then the next thing to do is to focus on the unity of God, right? To say, our tradition, Shema Yisrael, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, right? That prayer. Lord our God, the Lord is one, and to focus on what it means that God is one. In other words, there's nothing that's outside of godliness. There's nothing outside of godliness. The only thing that's, so to speak, on the only place where God isn't is where you don't allow him to be, where you don't invite him in. Where you don't allow him to be, that's where he isn't. And if you're focusing on evil, you're for sure not focusing on good. You're not focusing on God. Right? Because it's hard to focus on two things at the same time. So to be here and now, the first thing is to absorb oneself in studies. If that doesn't work, then you absorb yourself in prayer, and specifically the prayer about the oneness of God. And if that doesn't work, says the Talmud, if that doesn't work, think about the day of your death. Think that one day you're not going to be able to do anything anymore. It's all going to be over, right? Now, that's not a morbid thought. It's not supposed to be a morbid thought. It's supposed to be the realization that now is your opportunity. Yeah, when you reach the age of 120 or whatever it is, at whatever age a person passes away. We say 120 because that's the age that Moses passed away. So that's the ideal age that a person should live to. And there have been some people that lived that long in Jewish history, but in any event, that's how we say it. So after 120 years, you won't be able to have the choices anymore. You won't be able to make the right choices. You won't be able to change anything. Your past will now be history, right? There won't be a present for you anymore. In other words, there won't be a soul enclosed within a body anymore, because the body and the soul part at the moment of death. The soul departs, and it doesn't come back to the same body. The body decomposes basically and goes through its cleansing process by doing that. And that's what we have to focus on, that one day it's all going to be over and we're not going to be able to grab the opportunities that are lying around in front of us. So what we have to focus on, therefore, is the opportunity, according to the last mode, the opportunity that exists now and will not exist in the future, will not exist after 120 years. And therefore, the past is gone. It doesn't matter. The future, the future far ahead of us also doesn't matter, because it's so far away that there will come a time when we won't even be able to relate to it. So what we have to focus on is the immediate future and the present. And as Leah Ruby says over here, it's similar to giving negative attention to children. When you give negative attention to children, they don't know how to handle that, and they become more and more stuck in negative behaviors or destructive behaviors of one sort or another. Yes, as reciting Psalms could certainly be one of the ways of putting oneself into a different headspace. Concentrating on the meaning of them, if it's at all possible, for sure. That would work, and that was Rabbi Nachman sort of gave people a sort of a protective layer, a way of protecting yourself by reciting certain Psalms in a certain order on a daily basis. The Book of Psalms is always a good resource to go to. So, just to recap, the forces of negativity could possibly be regarded as some kind of completely external force that's ruining my life and making me miserable and making my life miserable. That's an incorrect way of looking at things. The correct way of looking at things is that it's my behavior that is the cause of this. Yes, there are negative forces that are there since the time of creation, or negative forces that come from other people. But am I opening up myself to these forces or not? Right? If one does not, if you reject those negative forces and the negative ways of thinking and the negative behavior that gives a home to all that negativity, then things are going to start to change. They might not change overnight. They may change overnight, but they usually change over a period of time as we tend to change and we start to focus more on what it is that I can do to get myself to a different place, rather than what I can do to get myself away from this place. It's no point in running to Tehran because he's going to run with you. You're going to meet him right there, right? That's where I started off the story of the prime minister of the king. So, would a curse be from the negative force? Yeah, a curse is something that that can be a negative force, but one does not have to let the curse be effective. There's a story told in the Talmud about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Elazar. So he sent his son, Rabbi Elazar, he sent him to certain sages to get their blessings. And he came back from visiting these sages, and he was white. And his father said, "What happened?" So he told him that they not only did they not bless me, but they cursed me. So what did they say? So he explained what the curses were. And Rabbi Shimon began laughing, and he said, "No, those are not curses. Those are in fact blessings, and I'll explain to you how. Right? I'll explain to you how." And he went on to explain how each of those curses was in fact not a curse, but it was a blessing. There's a similar story, or a slightly different story, but a story with a similar theme about the first Rebbe of Chabad, the first Chabad Rebbe, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, and his son. It so happened one time. Now, the Rabbi Shneur Zalman Eliade, the father, was the one who always read from the Torah on the Sabbath and 2 days during the week. We read a section of the Torah called a parasha, a section of the Torah, a section of the Bible. It's read out in public, out loud, and with certain cantillation notes and so on and so forth. And everyone tries to follow along inside the, inside their copy of the Bible and so on. He reads from a Torah scroll. So it once happened that Rabbi Shneur Zalman Eliade was away when it came to the section which is called KiTov. Yeah, KiTov. KiTov is a section which part of the section deals with terrible, terrible curses that Moses utters in explanation that this is what's going to happen if you don't go on the right path. At least that's on the surface of it what it's saying. Anyway, when this boy heard the curses, that week his father was away, so that week his father wasn't reading from the Torah, but the following week, when he came back, he found that his son was ill. And he asked the son, Rabbi Dovber, later became Rabbi Dovber, the second Lubavitcher Rebbe, he said to him, "What's wrong? What happened? Why are you sick?" and so on. And he said, "Because I heard the curses in this week's Torah reading." He said, "What?" I'm sorry, it wasn't his father that said, it was a Hasidim that asked him. He said, "But you heard these curses many times before." So he said, "Yeah, but when my father read them, I only heard blessings. I didn't hear curses. When my father read them, I only heard blessings, not curses." And that's the point. We have to look for the angels. Forget about the demons. I don't want to use foul language over here, but just dump them. You don't need to focus on them. No need to focus on those things. Look for the angels. Look for the angelic forces. Look for the positive forces. Look for the light. And don't try and drive out the darkness. It's not gonna help. Yes, looking for excuses we always do. That's for sure. Why we haven't achieved what we're supposed to, but that's not going to get us anywhere. Why we haven't achieved it isn't going to help. We can start analyzing. We can go to a psychiatrist and sit on a psychiatrist's couch for 17 years and try and figure out why we didn't achieve what we were supposed to achieve, instead of using the time to try and achieve what we're supposed to achieve. Why I didn't because I'm a human being. We all have fallacy of weaknesses and failings and mistakes. But don't worry about them. They're not gonna. They're not going to. The mistakes and the failings, the human failings, the failures that we all go through, are not the be-all and end-all of our existence. The more we focus on them, the more we think about them, the more depressed we get, the less we're able to do what we can do. So therefore, it's time to turn around say to the darkness, listen, you keep yourself busy with whatever you want to do, but I've got other things to do. I'm busy with the angels. I'm busy with the light. I'm busy with the positive things. Psychoneuro curse. This is interesting. Victim of a psychoneuro curse, which is seemingly counted with negative words, they hold out a child, and then the child repeats them internally, and time passes and indulges, still repeating the words internally. Yes, 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 yes. Drugs and alcohol, but the curse is being held in place by the person who's so sad, but we can probably all relate a bit. Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely correct. And in fact, that's how we understand a lot of the psychological illnesses that people suffer, is because they adopt the point of view of usually a parent, but sometimes a teacher, or sometimes a peer or a group of peers, and we regard ourselves as useless and stupid and fat and ugly and horrible and nasty and da, yeah, without stopping to examine for a moment whether this is even true. Whether it's even true. And most of the time it's not true. Everyone has their failings, but everyone also has good things and good points. And the more we focus on the good, again, the more we focus on the good, the more the bad is just going to dissipate. We're going to forget about it. And the way to remove bad things from ourselves and bad forces from ourselves is by doing good things for other people. That it's a wonderful trick that you can use at any time to improve your mood and to improve what it is that you're trying to achieve, to improve your likelihood of getting there. All right, let's leave it at that for tonight, ladies and gentlemen.